Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
Welcome everyone to The Ghost Show, and I am one of your hosts, Seika Groves.
Hi everyone, my name is Ian. I am a paranormal investigator, paranormal researcher, and I've been working in this field for almost 10 years now and have done quite a few number of investigations along the way.
Good. And I'm just to sort of run through my background. I'm a medium, but I'm also an archaeologist. So it kind of comes, I have an interesting way of looking at sites when I work on sites. But I also have a fair amount of experience in bringing the Victorian macabre to the current populace and allowing them to have a little glimpse inside what things like Victorian mummy unwrappings were all about, Victorian seances, and a number of different sort of occult things that went on in this era. And today, actually, we're going to be talking about Victorian seances, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But unfortunately, Rachel is not with us again. She's a little bit under the weather today. So as I said, I think she was partying too much. It was her twin daughter's 16th birthday yesterday. So we'll say belated happy birthday to the girls.
Happy birthday.
Yes, and hope that they had a wonderful day. And hopefully Rachel will be with us again for the next show. So I have to ask, Ian, we start doing these shows and it's a seasonal thing. So we run from essentially sort of mid-September to about June of, the seasons. So we kind of cover winter and spring. We have a show every week, so it's always hard to come up with a new, fresh topic. And I'm wondering if you gave it any thought when we were away for the last few months. Were there any things that sort of popped up that you thought, hey, we haven't done a show on this, or we have, but maybe we should revisit?
Well, there are certainly countless well-known locations out there that have been investigated that are always worthy of talking about. Some of the examples that we could discuss on a future show. I actually know some people who have investigated some of these locations. So I have their evidence available that we can discuss.
Nice.
As opposed to, everybody knowing of these locations based upon those paranormal TV shows that are out there.
Right.
And
there's plenty of those.
Yeah. And as well, of course, as I say, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I certainly have my own experiences to discuss. So there's certainly no shortage of potential future topics. That's for sure.
That's for certain. I mean, we've been running the show now. Rachel and I started this show. It had a previous name, Down the Rabbit Hole. And before that, we were called the Paranormal Podcast. So we've gone through a few inclinations and a few different hosts, a sort of accompanying hosts. But we've been going now for five years, I think, 5 or 6 years. So it's been a while. We've covered a lot of topics. And I know that we used to do a readings show where Rachel and I would do, psychic readings in the moment for people who had emailed us or were calling into the show when we were on Blog Talk Radio. So we may revisit that again at some point, but I've been thinking about just a few different ideas and different topics that, while not all completely paranormal in nature, have some sort of, supernatural or interesting take on otherworldly things. And I would really like to do a show on the Egyptian Book of the Dead, because I
Oh,
don't,
good idea.
yeah, I don't know that we've ever really touched on that. I know Rachel and I have talked about it a couple of times, but nothing in depth. So I think that could be an interesting show too. And that might be something. And I know Rachel's got some ideas, and she's got a lot of locations that she really likes in the UK, seeing that she's originally from the UK, that there's some really great sites over there as well that I have not yet been to, but I'm planning on getting there now. I have my citizenship of the UK, so hopefully we can go over there and do a little bit of investigating. But one of the other places that we did speak about was the Boleskine House, which I do some historical research and video for. And I'm hoping to get over there and be able to do a nice investigation at that site as well. So today's show, we're going to talk about Victorian subject, sort of near and dear to my heart, which is the Victorian Seance. And I want to kind of touch on the separation of the seance from the UK to America, because there is some varying differences and some very large differences in my opinion. I mean, again, it's an opinion, but just from my experience and my, research and having done many lectures on this for museums, and that is that the UK had a very different approach to the idea of a seance, and then it sort of took off in America. And I guess we should probably just touch on the American side of things. It's been done to death, pardon the pun. Sort of the whole Fox sisters and the spiritualist movement, and other people that kind of developed the Victorian seance in America. And as interesting as it is, it kind of goes in a different direction from where I want to go. But do you want to sort of touch on anything? Is there anything, within that realm of the American spiritualist movement, or the idea of a Victorian seance for them, that interested you or interests you still?
Well, I find that so much of what takes place in North America, at least in recent history, is influenced by all the Hollywood movies.
Of course.
And the television programs. And but what I've been able to experience over the years is I have seen many different styles of seances taking place, from ones that are very, very extravagant to just as simple as people sitting around a table, just placing their hands on the table with no other tools whatsoever.
We have some interesting stuff behind me
And
here.
using their own bodies as a channeling avenue for the energy to come through.
And that's how I do it. I don't really use any tools or anything else if I'm doing a Victorian seance. It tends to be, I don't need any sort of specific format either. I mean, we don't have to be seated around a table or touching hands or doing anything like that. But again, that's my own experience, right? That's my own ability to channel. And so I don't feel that I need to do that, but it is fun to do that. It is fun to show that side of things, because even in the UK and in North America, predominantly America, and when I say predominantly America, predominantly New York State, seem to be the real hotbed for it. But the interesting thing is that if you are doing it and you are actually channeling spirits, then you're right. You can have it very simplified and just sit and enjoy the moment. Now, I'm just going to move to one side here because I pulled this picture up because it's such a fun picture, because this to me is just everything that talks about what people believe a seance was all about. And especially during that period of the Fox sisters and, getting into the spiritualist movement in the United States. I mean, we have a guitar hovering up in the corner. We have automatic writing going on the table. Everyone's got their hands clasped. We've even got somebody looking very shocked, just over, where is he? Right there. So he's looking very shocked. Oh, right in the moment. There's a lot of images as well where you have table tipping and you have all of these kinds of elements of, what we think of as Victorian seance, but also what Hollywood has certainly perpetuated as well after, taking these ideas and kind of running with them. And so let's talk about a couple of the techniques that you said you were interested in. What were some of the techniques that you discovered about these seances?
Well, since you've just briefly mentioned it, and in your photograph behind you there, the automatic writing technique, which is where a writer will sit down with a pencil and a sheet of paper, and supposedly, if everything works as to plan, as they hope, a spirit energy will channel through the writer and will use the sheet of paper and the pencil or whatever to bring forth the communication that they're trying to acquire. And so in that regard, the writer sort of becomes a human spirit board.
Right, yeah. And it does kind of have that concept of either a Ouija board or a planchette of some sort. There's even the automatic writing hand that you could get, that you could, use when you were doing communication. And the other thing too, like today as well, we have something like an obelisk that, spits out words for us. And in some cases can create, a sentence if those words make sense in order that they're being, sort of projected to us. So we have, even today we have these pieces of equipment that, while they seem a little bit more sophisticated, in reality, they are still using that same concept of automatic writing or, auditory, right, through this. And what I always find interesting is in this picture, of course, it's the spirit hand that has slid in and is writing. There's a number of interesting, what's the word I'm looking for? Outcomes, perhaps, to some of this automatic writing. If you look online, you can find quite a lot of details about some of the things that have been proclaimed through automatic writing. And we even get to a point at some, in some instances where it's another language or some sort of, conceived language that's been written down and nobody knows how to figure it out because it's only spoken by the spirits that are speaking through the person, and only they can tell you the message and these kinds of things. So how do you feel about that?
Well, that's an interesting point, because I know in the past we have talked about EVPs being recorded, electronic voice phenomenon. Say, for example, a paranormal team going to, let's say, Italy, and they acquire contact with a spirit from, let's say, the 17th century. And at least on these paranormal shows that that you see out there,
they all
the
speak
EVP
English.
from this 17th century Italian person is always in English.
Right.
Well, that's ridiculous.
And not in 17th century language either, because the dialects were different in the 17th century. Even English was spoken differently in the 17th century. So I do find that amusing. I know that when I do get contact from spirits that are not English speaking, they don't speak English to me. They speak whatever language they spoke. And
I remember you telling me one time a while back, you had encountered a native person's
Mhm. Yeah,
spirit,
indigenous,
and they spoke to you in that native
right,
language.
in their language. And that's
Yeah.
happened to me more than once. That's happened to me quite a few times, actually, and in various different indigenous languages as well. So for me, I don't necessarily know what language it is they're speaking. I have to kind of base it on the region that I'm in when I'm doing the work. But at the same time too, we also have to go through the concept of, while today there's certain indigenous people located in regions where they weren't at that time. So we have to go back beyond those records and then look to see, if indeed it's, but it's hard, right? Because some of those languages don't exist anymore either. So that makes it really difficult. I did a reading one time for a gal whose aunt came through speaking Spanish. And I don't speak Spanish. I understand a small amount of Spanish, but I'm not fluent. But I was just sort of regurgitating what I was hearing, and she understood every single thing that was being said. So that's an interesting thing. So at some of these seances, I was doing some digging around on the UK side of things, and looking at some of the records from some of the older seances that had taken place there. And funnily enough, everything was in English, right? Because I mean, we're in England, so they're predominantly going to have that. I have come across a couple of little excerpts from people in Scotland where it was in Gaelic, in Scottish Gaelic, and again in Wales, in Welsh, things like that, right? Which is not unexpected at all in those regions. But what I find interesting about the records that we have for UK style seances is that they're very different from the North American style of seance. And there's even some records of seances that took place in Louis's courts. So Louis the 15th, actually, there are records showing that, this was something that even in the court of Louis, and doesn't necessarily mean that he himself was participating, but certainly the courtesans that were within his, in his palace were sitting around and doing these types of seances, which is, kind of, again, the history, when you go back and look at the idea of the Ouija board. I know a lot of people say it's French, but I can't find any real records that say it's French. I think it was developed in America. I don't know. I could be wrong on that. I haven't done enough digging into spirit boards myself.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, but the idea of the planchette was certainly, the word is French, right? And so we and it's just yes we're together, right? But the idea is that in some of the records of Louis' courtesans, we do have them using a glass, actually, a wine goblet type of glass. Would have been different than what we associate with a wine goblet today, but that little, a crystal glass that they were using as a sort of mechanism to, I guess, maybe direct the energy, which is an interesting thought. So we still have this idea. And in the UK, when I read about some of the Victorian seances, for the most part, depending on who was giving them and how they were done, because there was certainly the spectacle of entertainment attached to the whole concept of the occult in the Victorian era, but also as well the idea of a lot of private ones in homes where we don't see the destination of answers. And again, we can only go by what's written down. For all we know, there was some sort of preconceived destination of answers, but it doesn't say it in the notes or the records or the recollections of certain seances. But let's talk about some of the things that were commonly employed, tools or tricks of the trade of offering a seance that, in most cases, I would consider entertainment as opposed to, a private at home, just the family sitting around trying to contact a spirit. But it did become huge and it was very, very popular. So what were some of the things that you discovered that, some of these techniques that were implied or applied?
Obviously, the first one you got to talk about in today's modern age is the spirit board.
Right.
You can go to your local toy store and buy it. So when people think about a seance, I'm sure that you could bring 10 people into a room, say the word seance, 9 out of 10 will probably think of a spirit board as the tool that would be used. Again, I believe that comes down to the Hollywood movies and the TV shows. It's just sort of been put up here in everybody's brains.
I agree.
That is what a seance today is about. But of course, as we know, seances have been around forever. And as I say, it can be as simple as sitting around a table with just your hands on the table. But there's another technique, which I believe is somewhat older, and that is called scrying.
Scrying, yes. I actually scry.
Do you?
Yes.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe scrying is when you use a reflective surface, such as a mirror or some kind of a flat surface of water that becomes a portal that the energy can then
manifest through.
Yeah.
Right, and that's true. I mean, for me, I do prefer water. Water is sort of the medium that I like for scrying. I do recommend when people are trying scrying that they use a metal bowl because it does have reflective properties as well as the water being reflective. But there's different ways of doing it. And I know that there's people that, and I've read, just historically that there is also a way of, sort of pouring water down a mirror and using almost this double idea of scrying. And for me,
I've never heard of that being done before.
Yeah.
Combining the two techniques.
Combining the two. For me, I don't know that I would ever do that. I think it's one or the other. The idea with scrying, though, is different than what Hollywood perceives it to be, of course, right? Because in Hollywood, we see people sitting in front, and a crystal ball is also a scrying, tool as well. But we see these, in Hollywood, we see these giant crystal balls and we see these images forming inside the crystal ball. And it doesn't really work like that. It's not to my knowledge or ability, and I'm fairly able at scrying. Generally, it's a focus, and it allows me a place to focus my thoughts. And then I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, it comes to me in my mind's eye, and that's where I see everything play out. This goes sort of the same for water or for a mirror. You can also use obsidian, a sheet of black obsidian, something like that, that has a reflective surface. And it really is about focus and understanding. So it is different than a spirit board, right? Because generally when you scry, you don't have multiple people doing the same thing within, that energy. I mean, I always scry on my own. I don't invite people to all put their hands in the bowl of water, and we don't do it that way. But it still is something that was definitely a technique at that time as well. And this is where we see, so many different kinds of things come forward. But scrying is certainly something that I've used, and it is quite effective. I'm just not sure it's effective as a group of people. And that's just for me, because these are my personal experiences. I can't say what other people's abilities or what they've experienced. But for me, it's sort of a very personal thing if I'm scrying with water or a mirror. And you can even scry with a candle. You use that flame on the candle as your point to focus your energy. Because
Right.
as I say, a crystal ball, all of that, the images don't really appear on the surface or in the water, so to say. They really do appear in our mind's eye, although that surface is allowing us that reflective quality to perhaps see it. I can't really explain how it happens. It just happens.
It just happens,
It
right?
just happens, right? So yeah. So what's a couple of the other things that you have found out that?
Well, I have also, excuse me, I've also heard of dowsing rods
Mhm.
being
Okay.
being used in seances as tools,
Mhm.
as well as what they're used for in paranormal investigation.
Right, right. And dowsing rods go back as far as time. You know, the idea of dowsing rods. Um, I was taught as a child to find two willow sticks, you know, or a willow tree
Mhm.
close to the water, and to use two willow sticks as rods. And the reason being this is it's kind of a combination because willows actually, wherever willow trees are, you will find water, whether it's on the surface of the ground or it's underground. Willows only grow where there's a water source. And so I feel like there's a bit of a combination there. You get the energy from the tree and the energy from the water, which perhaps makes those scrying rods or sticks, you know, you would get like a Y-shaped bough, right? Something not too big, just, you know, yay big, like that. And it would branch off with into a Y, and you would hold the one end and allow those two, you know, branches to find you water. This was a really this technique goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It's written about in medieval texts. It's written about in, you know, early records, and I believe even in Roman texts there are mentions of using this kind of thing, right? So very interesting, those ones. What else did you find that struck you as?
What do you think about crystals?
See, crystals for me, I don't really use them for anything. They don't, I just don't, I love them. They're beautiful, but I don't really resonate with the need to use their energy for things, other than maybe a boost up after the fact. Like if I've done something, and I really like iron pyrite for that, for me, it's very grounding. But again, it's really how people utilize their energy in these things, right? So like I said, in terms of a seance, I don't know that there's anything right or wrong. It's just the person who's conducting or bringing the energy in. If that's what they're doing or what they use, I guess if it works for them, that's really all that matters, right? There's just no, well, no, you shouldn't use that. I don't really follow that kind of belief. I just think that if it works for you, whatever the tool is, use it. Yeah, crystals for
I
me
agree.
during
Yeah.
a seance, I don't really feel the need for them. But that again is my own personal experience. Yeah.
So, okay, another question. Since, okay, you just answered about crystals. What about the use of tarot cards as being a seance tool?
Again, you know, if that is your source for information through divination, I guess that you could certainly apply tarot cards to it, right? You could put those cards down on the table. Perhaps you could ask the energy or the spirit, you know, what do they see? How would they present themselves? And you could draw cards and put them down on the table, and a message could come through that way as well, right? So again, I'm very open to how you know, work with things. And for me, I don't use tarot cards. So again, it wouldn't be something that would work for me. Well, it might. I don't know.
You never know.
But you never know, right? But I'm not a tarot reader. So for me, I would interpret my own messages through those cards. And I guess that's really the idea of any divination tool. You are interpreting your own message through what you're using. But again, I could see that as a tool being used, certainly.
Yeah, and okay, one more I've got here is just a straight basic channeling that I know of a gentleman who's a very well-known psychic, and what he has learned to do over the years is just to sit in a chair like this and just open himself up, and he will go into a trance and can use his own body in this trance state as a communication tool.
And that's what I do, but I don't go into a trance. I would not say that what I'm in is any kind of trance, although I've had experiences that are very out of body in a strange sort of way, because I'm actually in the moment as opposed to in my body. It sounds crazy. I'm not actually physically leaving my body, but my mind is now seeing things the way that spirit would have seen or experienced them. So maybe that's a trance. Right. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I've never really thought of myself going into a trance state, but maybe I should ask people around me what happens to me when this happens, because I don't really know what happens. I mean, I feel like I'm in the moment because I can still, I'm still aware of where I am, although I'm kind of experiencing something different. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I trance. I've never really asked anyone. Like I've never, and hey, anyone out there who's been to my seances or do I go into a trance? I don't know. Honestly, I've never really thought, and we don't videotape any seances that we do. I don't do any of that because it's just for respect, out of privacy for people. Messages that come through can be very personal. The experiences can be very personal. So I don't videotape those kinds of things. So if anybody's been to any of the seances that we've held, let me know what happens to me, because honestly, I don't know. I should probably ask my husband. He's usually at them. You know, what happens? I've never really thought about it. So maybe I do go into a trance. I don't know.
Well, if you did, I'm sure you would have some kind of recollection of it.
I don't know though, because I mean, I know what happens in that moment. I know exactly, I'm getting all the information. I can tell, like I can speak as it's happening. I can see it. I can experience it. And I suppose when it's over, there's a moment of sort of, it's feels like everything just kind of drains away. And then I'm back in the present. So I don't know. I don't know. You know, I mean, that's the strange thing. It just happens like that. Like literally I'm there, I sit. Sometimes I'll have pre-visitations in a way. I'll have these feelings, or I'll start to get names, or and this could be a day or 2 days, a week ahead of time. And it's like they know. It's like they know that, this is going to be the moment, and I'm going to be their conduit. So yeah, I've never really much thought about it. And isn't that the weirdest thing? And I suppose it's like anything that you have a natural ability to do, you sort of just kind of take it for granted, because it's just part of who you are. So you don't really analyze the heck out of it, right? It's part of your day-to-day. And I've had people ask me that before too, like just when I've been doing, seances or events coming up, and I get interviewed by newspapers or media or whatever. And they're like, so what's it like when, this doesn't happen? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what it's like. And I've said it before, I don't know what it's like to be a muggle. You know, because I've just always been this way. So for me to not experience things, I don't know what that feels like or seems like, because this is just part of who I am. So I guess I take it a bit for granted. Maybe I should pay more attention to what I do, you know, in future when I'm on an investigation and that, just to see. But interestingly enough, yeah, I guess I do that same channeling / maybe trancing. I don't really know. But yeah, so let's talk about some of the more Hollywood takes on. Oh, excuse me, my phone is ringing. Oops. I'm not answering that, by the way. So we'll just let that ring. Hey, we're live. This is why we get these things. Don't shut off my phone.
It's someone calling in wanting to give their opinion.
That's it, or spirits calling from another realm to tell me I trance. But that being said, let's talk about sort of some of the things that Hollywood touches on. Like when you see a scene in a movie that sets up a Victorian seance, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it kind of like this scene behind us?
Yeah. You know, right now I've got movies flashing through my brain right now. And some of the more recent ones, like the Ouija movies, maybe the Conjuring movies that are out now.
Okay.
You know, they focus entirely on the spirit board.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one movie out there that comes to mind. It was made back in 1980s called The Changeling.
Yes.
With George C. Scott. And in this movie, at one point, they set up a seance to contact the spirit of this child that was haunting the house. Not to give away too much of the story, that if anybody's never seen it, it's a pretty good movie. And what I found interesting watching this, and I do still have a copy today, I watch it every now and again. And in this seance that they do, they combine two techniques together, is that they do automatic writing combined with recording for EVPs.
Oh, okay.
That's very interesting in this movie that they kind of branched out into two separate categories.
Right.
And just combined it all together.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of it, it's Hollywood. It's you know, it's writing. It's the writers. It's the script writers.
Right.
Yeah, and as we say, you know, on the TV shows, it's all about ratings, right?
Right. Yes. So interestingly enough, too, speaking of the Ouija board, I mean, that sort of first came on the market in the 1880s, right? So it sort of followed that spiritualist movement, the Fox sisters, all of that. And it kind of, you know, appeared in the 1880s as a parlor game, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, so it's an interesting concept that, you know, we've kind of had this board around since that time period, and that has just become part of the vernacular of, you know, these kinds of occurrences. I
think the board, as you say, it's been around forever.
Yeah.
Dates back to ancient China.
Right.
And what it really is today is it took off in a different direction, as you say, when it became a board game. When it was you know, marketed and
marketed that you could keep
marketed by Hasbro.
Yeah. And that's the more modern version. I think there was a novelty company back in the late 1800s in the US that had marketed the device, the game originally. And then I think it was probably around the 1920s or 30s that Hasbro took over the marketing for it and kind of ran with it. And, then it was in everybody's closet with their checkered boards and their Monopoly game. I know when I was a kid growing up in the 70s and that, pretty much everyone had Monopoly and Ouija board in their closet where it was games. It's like, what do you want to play today? I don't want to play with that one, thanks. But interestingly enough, I mean, we also get into things like table tipping, right? Which is an interesting adventure in, proving that spirits are there by having this table, while your fingers and the table is moving around out from under you. And I happened to be at an event at one point where this was going on in a room that was filled with 18 tables of seances happening. And this table tipping was going on. And I can tell you that it was very distracting for other people who were trying to operate, in a slightly different vein of seance. But, table tipping was something that was very popular. We have things like table knocks, and we have all of these different, response and, call and response kind of activities that surrounded the seance. And in, sort of legit terms of a seance, in the UK, some of these ones that were done by, people in societies, again, it's really hard to say how much of it was really true and how much of it was gimmick, right? To make people believe that, they were being contacted by their loved ones. I mean, there was some really elaborate techniques that were implied, everything from, spirit cabinets to ectoplasm, to ghosts flying through the room, to people, leaving their bodies and a spirit would come in, which is kind of like the spirit cabinet, right? You would have your medium walk into the spirit cabinet and out would come this ethereal being and, give you all of these, talk to you about the spirits of your loved ones. And unfortunately, it's really difficult to get past a lot of these tricks. There was a very well-known trick employed at many commercial fairs and festivals that traveled in the United Kingdom, but also in the United States and probably in Canada as well, where you would have a psychic who would come up on stage and that psychic would answer your questions for you. And it's a very easy technique. Whereas in the modern terms, it was done slightly differently, but in those times, you would have written down your question on a piece of paper, right? And you would have deposited those questions into a vase or a box or a hat or whatever the receptacle was as you walked into the seance. And once everybody was seated, somebody would take that hat and they would then go and they would pull certain questions and they would relate those questions to that person. And they would know because the person would have written their name down after the question, but also too, they would have done a little bit of pre-research. And then of course, the question that the psychic was receiving was always one that they knew the answer to, right? So they'd already knew ahead of time because they had these scouts that would go out into the area where people were waiting or into the audience in front of the stage before the show, if it was like outside of a carnival or a fair, and they would talk to people in the audience and they would pretend that they were just somebody there too, and they'd be like, oh my goodness, what are you here for? And of course people will just tell you their life story, right? And of course now they take that, they get the person's name and then they attach it to the question, and then that goes to the psychic on stage and and then we have all of this. And the movie Red Lights was kind of one of those based around that. And if have you seen Red Lights with Sigourney Weaver? And oh my gosh,
No.
Check it out. It's actually a really, really good film with a really great twist at the end that you don't expect. But it's based on this kind of show, psychic show that goes on. So we have all of these things. So I know that some of the classic standards, and this applies either UK or over here, was again seated around a table. Everybody would hold hands, and that holding of the hands was to help to generate a oneness amongst everyone and a connection and the energy. And if you broke away, then you broke that, energy for the spirit. And then of course that spirit would just vaporize and would disappear. There's some very, very elaborate things that went into seances at that period. And I think that that's what's so fascinating. When I present a Victorian seance, I literally present a Victorian seance. So when you come out, you get to see, you get to experience some of these interesting little things that were there to enhance the experience. But the other thing is that I'm legitimately also a medium. So when these messages do come through, that's something different. But when we do this, we present it in a way where you experience first a Victorian seance where we use some of the gimmicks. And then we bring somebody up from the audience and they sit down with us at the table. And, we might bring 4 or 5 people up from the audience and sit down. And then we begin the legitimate portion of the show, if you want to go there. But at the same time, when we do these little moments of what happened in the Victorian era in gimmick seances, we do explain it to the audience, which they're really fascinated with, because it's like, oh, I remember seeing that in this movie. And a lot of people have questions about how it's done. And I don't actually ever tell you how it's done. I'm not going to give away the secrets, but we are going to tell you what some of those things were that were utilized. So, I mean, it's such an expansive topic. And if we really wanted to sit down and pick it apart, we can get into just going through setting up a seance, right? And quickly, I'll just run through that. The idea there is that, again, you're inviting people into a location, be it your home, the parlor of your home, the dining area of your home, or there is, a location, a secret location that you're going to do this. And this was very big in the Victorian era. It made you feel like you were part of this, secretive occult society where only certain people got to be privy to this kind of experience. And that was probably 90% of the buildup for most people attending these seances, whether it was in the UK or if it was over here. The buildup to the seance, the medium, the person who was giving out the messages, was often mysterious and generally Eastern European, be it yes or no, with a terribly bad accent or otherwise. It was that indication of them being, somehow tuned in to the spirits. All of it really is a bit of a facade, right? That was used. And even at what I would consider legitimate, there's a lot of quotes going on today, legitimate experiences, it would really depend on the medium that was running the seance and, what was in it for them. I mean, other than a pretty good chunk of cash, right? Because they were paid very well to do this. Yeah. So it's a lot of, it's a lot of, is it real? Is it not real? Is it live? Is it Memorex? There's something for people who of a certain age won't get. But again, I'm so open to the idea of pretty much anything happening at a seance, legitimately or otherwise. But I mean, we've had so many things happen that were unexpected, that we didn't expect to happen, like knocking and things falling. And, I know that, like, we don't have any setups unless I'm doing a show, like the actual Victorian seance show, then that's different. But if we're actually doing a seance, like I've had all kinds of things happen, just all kinds of things that we cannot explain. So again, energy in the room, the people that attend, what do they bring with them? Are they bringing in any spirit attachments? Are they bringing in any kind of energy that's either good, bad, or indifferent? All of this can really affect a seance,
Yeah.
right? And I think that what we think about now when we think about Victorian seances is it has this romantic notion attached to it. And that's
It does,
why,
yes.
right? That's why it's so appealing. It's like, why is it so appealing? I mean, we do the same thing now. We're all sitting around in our ghost show t-shirts and, you know, or whatever it may be. And we're sitting in a group and we're doing this. It doesn't have that, you know, that sort of romantic, darkened wood paneled room with a table and certain people from, you know, certain brackets of society that are amongst the group, or this medium that, you know, we don't know anything about, and, you know, they have a very interesting persona and their name supersedes who they are. And, you know, we have this, and we don't really have that today. I mean, we have people, because of television, that will certainly garner large audiences of people, but the romanticism of the seance, or the you know, as we call it now, sort of a mediumship session, or you know, one of those kinds of things, it doesn't have the same glamour to it, right?
No, it doesn't
go there.
No.
I mean, I think that the Victorian seance, despite all of the legit and not legit things that went on, be it in the UK or in America, or in North America, or wherever these things took place, I think that that period, we tend to think somehow there was more connection to self, to the dead, to the other side. And I think that in a way, it may be a correct assumption, because we didn't have the electronics, and we didn't have the constant, you know, the social media. We didn't have the connection to the outside world. We spent a lot more time in family units, or spent a lot more time working just to, you know, put food on the table. There wasn't a lot of recreation for people. And also, you know, in our eyes today, the clothing and the, you know, just the everyday of that period seems to be so much more spooky, or, you know, there's something more.
Yeah, well, you look at you know, back then, even funeral techniques that in the Victorian era, the body of your loved one was at your home.
Yes.
And the people would come in for mourning at your residence, as opposed to today, when we all go off to a funeral home and all that.
Right. Yes. And that is just it. I mean, honestly, at that time period, people were much closer to death than we are today. Today, we kind of let everybody else do the work, and we just sort of appear and go through the motions, and whatever motions those are, we're really just appearing, and the funeral home or whatever sets up all of these, you know, rituals for us to attend. At this time, of course, it was, especially for the everyday person, you know, a very, very, very close, constant companion, because, you know, with wealth came, you know, better cleanliness, better places to live, better quality of food, you know, things like that. And so, while death was, of course, still on their doorstep every day, with common people, it was literally there all the time in your mind, right? There was just always something that to remind you of it. And so I think that there was a closer connection, just through that. as well, that today we kind of push it away like it doesn't really happen, and it happens all the time.
Yeah.
But we don't see it in the same way. But I do believe that the idea of the Victorian seance is highly romanticized now.
Oh,
Probably
absolutely. Yeah.
probably more so than it was in its era. In its era, it would have been more of something that was more inclusive and exclusive of a very large number of people. In secret societies, you would have had, more of these types of things. And then, of course, you have the showmen and the people that utilized it for public entertainment, right? So we have a lot of different aspects of it. And again, for me, some of the older, like when I do the shows for the Victorian stuff on stage, there's a lot to go through and a lot to remember when you're doing this. I prefer my own casual approach to it now, how I conduct it. But again, it's all just who we are as people, and it's all part of either you believe or you don't believe.
Yeah.
Right. There's people that sit on the fence, and they might come to a seance and then they might be convinced, or they might go on an investigation and they might experience something that makes them think, whoa, maybe there is more to this. But the majority of people are either one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And that sort of comes down to seances too, right? It's either you will attend or you will not attend. And you will either see it for something that it is or is not. And again, we still have plenty of entertainment out there, and it's it is what it is.
Yep.
For a lack of finding any other words to explain it, it really truly is just that. If you haven't experienced a seance and you're interested in one, then you can always talk to, I'm sure, people that are local in your community. I know that social media has umpteen million groups and different people that are often offering these things out there. I can't speak to any legitimacy of anyone outside of myself or people that I work closely with, but at the same time, just experience it for the fun of experiencing it, and maybe you will have an experience. But yeah, so I think today, we've sort of touched on things, and like we do in our shows, I don't think that we ever really go down one route and just stick to it and go hard and fast, and it's this, and it's always this way, and it's this way and no other way. Because for me, I'm so open to experience that I can only speak from my own, but I'm always interested in hearing other people's experiences. And sometimes they happen to be similar, and sometimes they happen to be really different. So, same thing here with if you've ever gone to a seance or you have the idea of going to one. But let's look at wrapping up today's show. Hey. So next week, Ian, what would you like to discuss next week? I know you had a couple of
as I say, I have a wealth of experience in this field, and there are many places to talk about.
So what would you like to discuss?
I'm sorry, what's that?
What would you like to discuss next week?
Well, since I brought it up to you the other day in private when we were talking about potential topics, all right, why don't we go with a very famous location in England?
Okay.
It's called the Ancient Ram Inn.
Oh, yes, the Ancient Ram. I did tell you my parents went there.
Yes.
Yes. Before, yeah.
And I myself have never been there. It's very high on my list as locations where I would love to go one day. But I do know a paranormal investigator who has personally been there. He was a friend of mine.
Okay.
And I can talk about the history of the location, because you can't appreciate the paranormal evidence without appreciating the history as well. And then I can talk about what evidence he acquired at the location.
Well, and if you ever have anybody that is wanting to come on the show and discuss with us, I mean, we're always open to having guests as well, right? So, yeah, but we'll do that then. Next week, we will talk about
Ancient Ram Inn.
Rams Inn in England. And we will discuss, I've actually seen a few shows that have been filmed there, but I actually do also have a friend who visited the location. Their story is probably not quite as interesting as your friends, but they did have some experience, and my parents went, and my parents said that they didn't pick up on anything.
Well, nothing's guaranteed.
No, and again, though, even if they did, they wouldn't admit it, because my mom does not like to admit that she's, yeah, it's kind of funny. But yeah, so we'll look at that again next week, and hopefully Rachel will be able to join us. And this might be a location that she has some knowledge about as well, being that she's from the UK, and I hate to say that because it makes it sound like, hey, I'm from Canada. Oh yeah, where do you live? I live in Toronto. Do you know this guy? Like, there's
yeah, you must know my. I've actually had that happen to me. Back in the 80s, I took a trip out to California.
That's so funny.
And I was in Los Angeles, and I got talking to someone, and that's exactly what happened. It's like, where are you from? I'm from Canada. Mm-hmm. He says, oh, well, my friend Joe lives in Montreal. You must know my friend Joe.
It's like, yeah, suddenly Canada's like this big.
Sorry, dude, I don't know Joe. Sorry.
No, and that's it, right? I mean, I find it funny that automatically, when I speak to people as well, that if I say I'm from Canada and they say, oh, I have a friend in Victoria. That's a 6-hour plane flight from me. I might as well be flying over to England, honestly. Yes.
To the Ancient Ram Inn.
That's it. So the Ancient Ram Inn it will be. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today on The Ghost Show.
The Ghost Show.
And we look forward to seeing you next week. And thanks, Ian.
Yep, thank you. And thanks everybody for watching. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook.
So the website is theghostshowonline.com. And we'll see you soon.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.